Israeli airstrikes in Beirut kill 7 civilians and wound 7 more. Sirens blare in northern Israel as rockets are seen hitting areas in the north. And Syrian media outlets report that Syrian air defenses were tackling hostile targets in western Damascus. It's 4 p.m. Cairo local time, and you are now watching Q News. And now we move to the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Seven Lebanese civilians have been killed and 7 others wounded in an Israeli airstrike on the Busheira district of Beirut. Israeli airstrikes on the suburbs have consisted of 17 raids and targeted several areas in Lebanon. The health ministry announced that 46 people were killed and 85 were injured in the past 24 hours. Sirens blared in northern Israel as rockets were seen hitting areas in the north despite interceptions. Israel announced that approximately 25 projectiles were fired from Lebanon. Some were intercepted and fallen projectiles were identified. For more analysis, we now move to Hala Al-Hamalawi in our newsroom. Hala?
Thank you very much, Riham. And for further analysis on the escalating tensions between Hezbollah and Israel, we're joined by the European Union spokesperson for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Mr. Peter Stano. Welcome to you, Mr. Stano.
Hello, good afternoon from Brussels.
Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. Now, sir, how do you view the developments in southern Lebanon, especially following the killing of Lebanese army soldiers?
The European Union, that means 27 member states of the European Union, are gravely concerned by what we are seeing happening in Lebanon, and not only in the southern Lebanon, as you said, also in Beirut, because we are seeing the Israeli forces targeting densely populated areas in Beirut, claiming also so-called collateral damage, namely civilians. And of course, the developments in the south are very concerning. And the European Union is strongly pushing for immediate ceasefire. That was the call from the extraordinary meeting of the foreign ministers of the EU member states on Monday. And we are urging everyone to de-escalate, because there cannot be military solution to this. And the further escalation of this confrontation will make sure that civilians are paying the highest price. And we are calling, of course, on Hezbollah to stop shooting the rockets against Israel, because this was actually the precursor to all the Israeli actions against targets in southern Lebanon and in Beirut.
Mr. Stano, after the Israeli occupation launched violent airstrikes on the southern suburbs of Beirut without prior warning, has the occupation army begun a war of extermination against the Lebanese people, civilians, on par with the one against Gaza? And is the EU willing and able to exercise substantial pressure on Israel to end the bloodbath?
Absolutely. We are very much involved and engaged in working with all the partners. That means with Israel, but also with the United States, with our Arab partners, the League of Arab States, to exercise pressure on everyone who is involved in this to stop it. And let's not forget, I mean, this latest escalation is just
Everyone, sir,
continuation.
everyone includes the Israeli government?
Of course, I mean, Israel is partner of the European Union, and we are very clear in our messaging. There were repeated calls from the side of the European Union last week already for an immediate ceasefire for 21 days. There was a statement by 27 member states. This is the strongest political message the EU can send, calling for ceasefire, for stopping the escalation of the conflict. But again, we cannot forget how this started. It started on the 8th of October last year when Hezbollah unilaterally started to shoot rockets into Israel. Of course, it does not justify the civilian deaths on the Lebanese side, but we need to see the Israeli reaction being triggered by the fire from the side of Hezbollah. And the rockets, they need to stop being shot from the Lebanese territory to the Israeli side. This conflict for 1 year displaced dozens and dozens of thousands of people on both sides, the Lebanese in the south of Lebanon and the Israelis in the north of Israel. And now what we are seeing, unfortunately, is very grave escalation, which makes us very concerned and which makes us doubling our efforts and our engagement internationally with partners, including with Israel, to make sure that this is stopped and that we start seeing not more escalation, but de-escalation.
Mr. Sano, you just mentioned that this has just started a year ago on October 7th. Actually, I don't know if the international media is talking about how or when it started before October 7th. But anyway, following repeated attacks along the blue line, do you think that the Israeli army will deploy new battalions to fight against Hezbollah? And will this even fuel escalation?
Well, of course, unfortunately, we are seeing that the escalation continues, and that's why we are urging everyone to start the escalating. But the one basic condition to stop escalation is stop shooting rockets. Once Hezbollah stops firing rockets against targets in Israel, and the targets in Israel include not only Jewish people, they include Arabs, Druze, Christians as well. So once they stop firing rockets, then Israel will not be forced to retaliate in the way it retaliates, unfortunately, for many civilians in Lebanon. So we are calling on Hezbollah to stop firing rockets. We are calling on Israel to stick to the international humanitarian law, not to engage in military incursions on the Lebanese territory. And we are calling for a diplomatic solution because this needs to be solved diplomatically. But first, the firing needs to stop from both sides.
Speaking of both sides, sir, in the past few hours, we witnessed repeated Israeli airstrikes on several areas in Syria, including the capital Damascus and other regions. With Israel intensifying strikes on Syria, where does the EU stand?
The European Union is very much interested in seeing the escalation, and that's why we are working with our partners on all sides in the Arab region, in the United States, in the United Nations as well, to make sure that together we exercise enough pressure on everyone involved in this armed conflict to de-escalate, to back down. I'm not spokesman of the Israeli side, but you hear the explanations from Israel. They are targeting the targets in Syria because they think it's Hezbollah, let's say, arms factories or storages or backup options or stuff linked to Hezbollah firing rockets against Israel. So once this is stopped, then Israel will basically lose credible pretext to retaliate. And this is our logic. This is what we are trying to tell to both sides. De-escalate. Because the ones paying the highest price are the civilians, the tens of thousands of people on both sides of the blue line of the border between Israel and Lebanon who are displaced. And unfortunately, on the Lebanese side, disproportionately high number of people who are paying also with their lives.
I don't know, but what was happening in Gaza for the past years, no one was launching anything against Israel, but yet Israel continued to launch airstrikes on civilian districts, killing thousands and thousands of civilians, including children and women. How does the EU see that?
The European Union keeps calling at the highest level by the voice of 27 member states and joining also the international community in the form of the United Nations Security Council resolution calling for immediate ceasefire and release of the hostages. Unfortunately, again, we have two sides of the story. Hamas, the terrorists from Hamas, are still keeping dozens of hostages somewhere underground in Gaza. And let's not forget, I mean, this was the start, the 7th of October, the terrorist attack against Israel and taking dozens of hostages to Gaza was the the trigger for the Israeli campaign, which continues until today, and the hostages are not being released. So that's why we are calling for the immediate release of hostages and immediate ceasefire, so that the humanitarian assistance can start flowing to those people who desperately need it, because the situation in Gaza is disastrous. This is a total disaster, humanitarian disaster, and that's why European Union is so much engaged, working also with Egypt. Very much, Egypt is a very important partner in this. We are bringing humanitarian supplies to Rafah, for example. Unfortunately, they are not being allowed to get in. So that's why we are pushing also at the international level for more humanitarian deliveries and, of course, for immediate ceasefire. But unfortunately, the immediate ceasefire cannot be enforced or be in place because there are still hostages being kept for no reason. Holding hostages is against any human norm, against any international law. So once the hostages are out, it will be probably more realistic to see any kind of ceasefire.
Okay, how about killing civilians? Would that go with international norms? And what exactly would be the role of the European Union to diffuse tensions in the region, eventually to reach a comprehensive ceasefire?
The European Union is very much engaged in looking for solutions or contributing to look for the solutions because, I mean, let's face it, in the end, it will not be the European Union who solves the problem. The problem needs to be solved by the Israelis and Palestinians, in this case, of course, first of all, Hamas, but in more broader picture by the Palestinians represented by the Palestinian Authority. That's why the European Union, for more than a year, we are advocating so much for starting efforts leading to the renewal of discussions or talks about the two-state solution. A few days ago, during the United Nations General Assembly, the European Union, together with Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, have launched another push of international community to make the two-state solution a reality. We created a global coalition to support the two-state solution. So this is what we are trying to create conditions so that finally we can see a proper solution being agreed between Israelis and Palestinians. Because unfortunately, what we are seeing in Gaza is just one very bloody episode in a very long-term problem, which has been there for decades, and that finally, I think everyone realizes needs to be solved in a sustainable way. And the only sustainable way is the two-state solution. So this is what we are working on together with partners like United States, Egypt, League of Arab States, Organization of Islamic Conference, and all the countries who are willing to work on this and finally try to contribute to solving this problem, which again can be only solved once the Israelis and Palestinians themselves sit down together and start the negotiations about the eventual peace deal.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Peter Stano, European Union spokesperson for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Now back to you again, Riham.
Thank you, Hela, for that interview. We move where overnight strikes on Beirut have killed 7 health workers near offices affiliated with the United Nations.
Israeli airstrikes on Beirut have continued with unrelenting ferocity. A strike last night killed 7 health and rescue workers. The strike came very close to hitting Beirut's central downtown area, where United Nations and government offices are located. The airstrike hit the Bashura district, specially targeting a multi-story building that houses an office of the Health Society. This marks the second airstrike in central Beirut this week and the second attack on the Health Society in just 24 hours. No prior warning was issued before the area was bombed. While Israeli airstrikes have primarily focused on southern and eastern Lebanon, including the southern suburbs of Beirut, where Hezbollah is prominent, the attacks have spanned across the country, claiming numerous civilian lives. Overnight, Beirut's southern suburbs were heavily bombarded, following an online warning urging residents to evacuate. Amid the destruction, residents of Dahya are fleeing as rubble and debris fill the streets. The Lebanese Health Ministry reports that 46 people have been killed and 85 wounded in the last 24 hours.
The Lebanese Health Ministry has reported that at least 6 people were killed and 7 injured in an Israeli airstrike on a residential building in central Beirut. Residents also reported a sulfur-like smell following the attack. Local media accused Israel of using phosphorus bombs, which are prohibited under international law for use near civilian populations. Hezbollah has announced that it launched a rocket attack on Israeli occupation forces in Iran's settlement. Hezbollah added in a statement that another rocket salvo targeted forces between Shatula and Al-Rahib. Hezbollah also reported that its fighters repelled an Israeli advance at Fatima Gate in southern Lebanon with artillery fire. World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom has confirmed that hospitals in Lebanon are overwhelmed due to an influx of casualties of Israeli aggression. Adhanom added that Lebanon's healthcare system is struggling to cope with the current situation as the number of deaths in Lebanon continues to rise. He noted that successive crises have weakened Lebanon's healthcare system, which is now struggling to meet high demands. Israeli warplanes have committed a massacre in Nabta, southern Lebanon, that resulted in numerous civilian deaths. Israeli occupation forces have also conducted an airstrike on the town of Kafr Tibetan, an entire district. Israeli warplanes launched a strike between the towns of Atit and Jueya. Meanwhile, Israeli occupation forces have reported western Galilee. They also reported the interception of 2 drones from the Lebanese territory off the coast of Nahriya. The drones were reportedly destroyed in an open area. Israel also said it detected the launch of 25 rockets towards Upper Galilee as part of a second rocket salvo fired by Hezbollah from southern Lebanon. Israeli media has reported the sound of sirens in Metula, Misgav, Akirat, Shmona and Margaroya in the Upper Galilee. The sirens were triggered following Hezbollah's attacks on several locations in the north. Media sources also noted the explosion of Israeli interceptor missiles over the Galilee as they engaged Hezbollah rockets. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has vowed a strong response to any further Israeli actions.
ما به دنبال جنگ نیستیم. این اسرائیل که ما رو وادار میکنه که عکس العمل نشون بدیم. اسرائیل در مهمان ما رو در تهران روز تحلیف ترور کرد. به ما گفتن شما صبر کنید. ما میخوایم صلح برقرار کنیم. اگر شما برخورد کنید صلح برقرار نمیشه. شکرا.
Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, has reiterated the kingdom's call for a 2-state solution in Palestine. Prince Faisal underscored the importance of resolving regional conflicts through diplomacy, stressing that ongoing aggressions and violations in the region are exacerbating political tensions and disrupting international trade. Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani has reaffirmed that Doha will continue its mediation efforts to help de-escalate the tensions in the Middle East.
التصعيد الأخير في الأيام الماضية في لبنان هو ما حذرنا منه منذ بداية العدوان الإسرائيلي، وهو في تزايد، وقد عملت دولة قطر بشكل مكثف للوصول إلى وقف لإطلاق النار واحتواء الصراع.
The British government has chartered more flights to help its nationals leave Lebanon. The measures come a day after an evacuation flight left Beirut. In a statement, the British government said that flights will continue as long as the security situation allows, and added that it is working to increase capacity on commercial flights for British nationals. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong has urged the thousands of Australians who are still in Lebanon to leave while possible. Wong stated that Australia has arranged 580 seats on flights departing Thursday and Saturday for citizens, permanent residents and families who wish to leave. She noted that these flights depend on Beirut Airport remaining operational.
40,000 Palestinians have been killed, more than 11,000 children, nearly 2 million Gazans displaced,
China has called on the United Nations Security Council to take urgent action to de-escalate the situation in the Middle East. That came after the latest Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon. China's permanent representative to the United Nations, Zhang Jun, has said that the Security Council has a primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. He urged all parties involved to return to political and diplomatic solutions, warning that the escalating conflict in the Middle East has caused an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. As you can see, live footage of Beirut, where we can see smoke plumbing out from recent airstrikes by the Israelis, striking several areas of Beirut, causing severe damage to many structures within southern Lebanon. In addition to Beirut, just yesterday, 7 were killed, and there was premise of the use of phosphorus bombs, which are considered illegal internationally, near civilian areas. In the last 24 hours, 46 people have been killed and 85 wounded. And the aggression continues in Lebanon, including the capital Beirut. As you can see, there have been airstrikes there. In addition to the aerial bombardment that Lebanon has been seeing, the Israeli army has exercised raids and incursions within southern Lebanon in the last 48 hours as well. There has been severe damage to many structures, including hospitals, civilian homes, and government structures, and also medical personnel were affected, where they were also targeted, where 7 health workers near the offices belonging to Beirut were also struck by aerial bombardments. And it seems that the Israeli side is still continuing to disregard international law when it comes to combat by the indiscriminate bombings seen in civilian areas and major damages there. Israeli strikes have not just hit southern Lebanon and the capital of Lebanon as well, but there have also been attacks in neighboring countries, including Syria. Earlier, there were attacks, a gunfire attack on a military outpost near Israeli, and the attacker was neutralized. We'll get back to you to more updates there in Lebanon once we have it, but we move to neighboring Syria, where Syrian media outlets have reported that Syrian air defenses were fending off hostile targets in western Damascus. Israel has intensified its targeting of sites near the border crossings linking Syria and Lebanon. Thousands have crossed the border over the past week to flee Israeli heavy raids on Lebanon. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we have been covering. Israeli airstrikes in Beirut kill 7 civilians and wound 7 more. northern Israel as rockets are seen hitting areas in the north. And Syrian media outlets report that Syrian air defenses were tackling hostile targets in western Damascus. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. For real-time updates, connect with us on the UMS digital platform. Watch it. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.